Sanskrit word. This is really terrible what Hitler did. He totally made these words and symbols, he kind of totally distorted them. I mean, honestly, I still get a when I see the swastika, but it's the other way around, actually. And when you do retreat, you're supposed to, well, at certain retreats, you draw a swastika underneath your seat, right? Just not a swastika, it's just the other way around, right? It's the symbol for the sun, for instance. Or like Arya, you know, Aryas were seen as blonde, blue-eyed people, they were seen as Aryas, right? Like superior. Total distortion of the word. Actually, an Arya being means someone spiritually superior. And so in the Buddhist case, the word is used for someone who has directly experienced reality, who's directly perceived how phenomena really exist. And once you do that, once you have that understanding with that direct experience, you remove some of the misapprehensions of reality, the coarser ones, and then as you continue on, you become more familiar with that direct experience, you remove even the subtler ones. So because they can't coexist, you can't have a mind that experiences things as they really are, and at the same time a mind that still holds on to inherent existence, that still holds on to a solid existence. To take a simple example, if you're scared there's a monster in the closet, the moment you open it and you find the absence of the monster in the closet, well, you know, and you're no longer going to believe in it, and you no longer have the wrong view that there is this ghost or this monster, whatever, in the closet. So here, once you actually, not just intellectually, but directly experience, looking into the cupboard is like the direct experience. It's not just someone giving you the reasoning why there's no one in there. No, you opened it, you looked yourself, you had a direct experience of the absence of this being in there. And so there's no longer any misapprehension. Well, here, of course, we don't have a sense consciousness that can directly apprehend the absence of inherent existence, etc. But we can, through meditation, gain that direct experience. And of course, our misapprehension of a ghost in a cabin or in a closet, or a monster in a closet, that is just in one lifetime. We have that for a short while, that kind of misapprehension. With regard to the misapprehension of reality, we had that for many lifetimes, so it's really deep. We know from our own experience, any kind of view, the more we cultivate the view, a wrong view even, the deeper it becomes part of our own continuum. So therefore it takes time. With that direct perception of reality, direct experience, you need to familiarize with that mind more and more, and then you can undo these wrong views so that they can no longer arise. You totally eliminate them. And if you eliminate them, since those wrong views gave rise to certain afflictive emotions, you can't have those afflictive emotions that would ordinarily give rise to them. So you eliminate not just a certain misapprehension of reality, you also eliminate the anger it could potentially give rise to, or the attachment. So in that way you get rid of the afflictive emotions because you get rid of the root, the different levels of the root. So the moment you have a direct experience of reality, you start removing those different levels. And from that moment onwards, you're an Arya, and in your mental continuum, you have a cessation of a particular misapprehension. So that cessation is a true Dharma jewel. And the mind that brought you that cessation, the mind realizing emptiness directly, or any other mind in the continuum of that Arya that assists that mind, that is conjoined with that mind directly experiencing reality, that is called Dharma. That's our real object of refuge. So when you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, are you thinking of that? No. No. So how should we think about it? How do we take refuge in an absence? How do we take refuge in the mind of someone who I don't even know? Right? I mean, I don't know. You could have, of course, but I don't know whether you do. I believe there are people who have that mind, but I don't know who it is. So I take refuge in that. How do I do that? Okay? But the wider sense, of course, of taking refuge in the Dharma is taking refuge in the teachings. taking refuge in the teachings that lead us to such a cessation and to such a state of mind. All right? Okay, so that's what it says here in terms of the Dharma jewel. In a stricter sense, it refers to what I just described. In the wider sense, it describes to the teachings in general. That's how we like to look at it. And then the Sangha jewel, again, restrictor sense is an Arya being, someone who has those cessations, those paths that I just described. In other words, a person who's directly experienced emptiness, the ultimate mode of existence of phenomena, and has therefore started to remove any of the obstructions, has attained one of those cessations. That's in the stricter sense an Arya being, and a Sangha being, a Sangha jewel. But of course we can think of the Sangha in a slightly wider sense as those who are monks and nuns, and in an even wider sense, anyone who practices the Dharma. Okay? So, who do we, strictly speaking, take refuge in? Well, in the Buddha. Buddha is Buddha. There's not like a stricter and a non-strict version. The omniscient mind, maybe more in the omniscient mind, but no, any quality you take refuge. There's no wider and stricter sense. And then with regard to the Dharma, the stricter sense is, as just said, the wider sense is the teachings, and then with the Sangha, stricter sense, Arya beings, wider sense, monks and nuns, even wider sense, anyone practicing the Dharma. Can it wait? Or is this clarification?
Related.
Yeah.
The Buddha jewel can it also be for Buddha nature? Refuge in Buddha nature?
That's the next, the resultant three jewels. Okay, so, but when you take refuge, we take refuge in two types. The causal means causal in the sense that they exist now and they assist us to become Buddhas ourselves in the future, right? From the Mahayana point of view, or the Nalanda tradition, if you want to not call it Mahayana, but the Nalanda tradition, where enlightenment is the main goal. The causal, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, are the ones we right now take refuge in as inspiration, etc. But there is also a resultant Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, our own future Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, that we take refuge in. But here taking refuge in doesn't mean entrusting myself, asking them for help, because can't help me right now. But aspiring towards my own future Buddha, future cessation and path, Dharma, and my future state of being an Arya. Does that make sense? So taking refuge means all three. Future Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay? So the causal three jewels, the resultant three jewels are therefore, as I just said, my future Buddhahood, my future cessations and path, or Arya path, and my future state as an Arya. And the causal three are the ones that assist me right now. That's what we take refuge in, those three. Okay, so are we really? When we say I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, do we really? We think it's so easy, those sentences. And one of my teachers, he's a wonderful meditator, he once said, he's a lot around His Holiness, because His Holiness asked him a lot to come to when he has meetings with people. And at some point he said he was present when someone had an audience and asked him about a commentary on the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. And His Holiness was so pleased. He said, no one ever asked me about that one. That is so important. People want mantras and something rare and something, but something so important and so relevant, as in like foundational, as Refuge and Bodhicitta. He said, no one asked me, and he was very pleased. And that makes so much sense, because we say it all the time, but we really need to understand what it actually means. I take refuge in the Buddha. Until I am enlightened, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. What is the Buddha? Who's the Buddha I take refuge in? What is the Dharma I take refuge in? What is the Sangha? Causal and resultant. Does that make sense? Should we do some meditation on that? Okay, let's do just to go over this, what we just did, just for a few moments, and to when we go through this, try to generate, and we haven't really gone through everything with regard to refuge, but whatever is your understanding, a sense of reliance on Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So as I go through them, just briefly, just to internalize what we just heard, try to yourself generate a sense of entrusting yourself, relying on them as we go through them. So whether it's causal or resultant. I'll start with the causal and I continue with the resultant. Okay. Alright, so take a minute to just focus on the breathing, to empty the mind of any disruptive thoughts. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in all the qualities that a Buddha possesses. His mind, in his body. That is the different ways in which the Buddha physically manifests. And since there is not just Buddha Shakyamuni, but limitless Buddhas, take refuge in all of their qualities. Similarly, we take refuge in our own resultant awakening. In our future enlightened mind. Future manifestations in different forms. We're aspiring towards those qualities. When we take refuge in the Dharma, in a wider sense, we take refuge in the teachings that were given by all the different Buddhas, in particular by Buddha Shakyamuni. We take refuge in our own future teachings. That we will give once we're enlightened. In a stricter sense, take refuge in the elimination of the misapprehension of reality. And therefore the elimination of afflictive emotions and their resulting suffering. And the continuum of an Arya being. And we take refuge in Arya path consciousnesses. That were the means to that cessation. And likewise, we take refuge in our resultant cessation and our resultant Arya path that will generate in the future. lastly, when we take refuge in the Sangha, in the wider sense, we take refuge in other Buddhist practitioners. To our own future self as a more advanced Buddhist practitioner. And more strictly speaking, we'll take refuge in all those who have directly experienced reality and have therefore become Arya beings. And we take refuge into our own resultant Arya state. So spend a moment just focusing on the sense of refuge in your own mind based on those different objects. Usually taking refuge is described as the entryway to Buddhist practice. So therefore, whenever we do any Buddhist activity, we always take refuge. But so far we haven't really talked about why and what are the causes, etc. So you just had a rough sense of what the object of refuge is. But refuge is important, they say, like so many other things, important in the beginning, important in the middle, important important at the end. So when you start off, it's important practicing. When you're ready, a practitioner, and even when you're highly advanced, you take refuge. Only a Buddha doesn't take refuge. Why would the Buddha take refuge? In what? So it's seen in the same way as bodhicitta is seen as the entryway into Mahayana practice, so is refuge seen as the entryway into practice in general. But then there are two causes, and they're really important. The first one is fear. Now in the West, we go, fear? Are you kidding me? I'm supposed to have fear now? I think we have a bit of a problem with fear. In the sense that there are two types of fear. There's rational and irrational fear. And the thing is, in Buddhism, fear is not mentioned much. It's not mentioned as an afflictive emotion, for instance, or even as a negative emotion. I guess because fear is not all bad. In fact, fear, when we lived in caves, in the days, like when, for millions of years living in a very different way, fear was actually very helpful. It could save our life. Fear of certain animals could save our lives. But nowadays, a lot of the fear we experience is totally irrational. And modern society has also created new causes for fear. I remember watching some of these documentaries where it talks about, in the US sometimes, the news, like Fox News, they talk about, oh, there's this happened, oh my God, there's this girl who was kidnapped on the way to school. So many kidnapping cases. And there was I remember one part of this documentary, they were talking about people no longer protect themselves from the real problems, but these problems are made up, they're like blown up, because otherwise people don't watch Fox News unless there's something sensational. And it makes people believe there are these fears out there, and they're a lot worse than the actual things we need to be careful about. There's one example in the documentary, it talked about there was some hurricane, but it also talked about some terrorists could infiltrate, could infiltrate some hospital or something. So instead of evacuating the hospital, they were like, where's the terrorist? There was no terrorist, it was just a rumor. So in the end, a lot of people got into a lot of trouble during the hurricane because they didn't evacuate the hospital, because there's other fear. So there are lots of examples like that. And insurance companies, of course, they very much feed into our fears. So the point is, we have a lot of irrational fears nowadays. Fears of the future, fears of losing something, and it's very much through advertising, etc., it's being enhanced. But actually there is fear that is rational. Fear that is good, that's a good type of fear. Fear of, experiencing certain problems that we don't need to experience. But that kind of fear, it's not like a debilitating fear. It's rational, as in like, all right, I don't want to experience this, I'm concerned about this, and so I want to avoid it. That kind of fear. It's kind of a rational type. And that's seen as something positive. No one wants to suffer, and we shouldn't suffer. In the sense, this can be a little bit misunderstood, that suffering is a state of mind. It's not the situation. So the Buddha is not saying, avoid any kind of situation that we would call suffering. We can't. We live in a world where we definitely experience the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. There's nothing